And I think we're just about to get started here in a couple of minutes. We'll see if we got any last minute stragglers joining.
At the moment, the waiting room is empty, so I think it's safe to get started.
Okay, great. Welcome to everybody. My name is Gene Guidry, and I am the programs chair for ULI Louisiana. And I am just really excited about today's presentation from Olympic Community. I think it's going to be really interesting. I've been looking forward to it for a while. This is the redevelopment of McDonogh19 in Holy Cross. And I would, for those of you that don't know who ULI is, and in particular ULI Louisiana, but we're a member-based organization. We are national and international, and ULI has a bunch of different district councils, and that's why I say we're ULI Louisiana, and we are mainly based in New Orleans, but we represent all of Louisiana, and it's a diverse organization, multidisciplinary, architects, engineers, bankers, developers, you name it, and we help cultivate and practice good and responsible land use. And before we get started, I would like to thank all of our sponsors who are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Also, just by being a member, you're also sponsoring us and helping us to create this really great content. So we have some upcoming events. We have here what we're calling a ULI Louisiana Content Hour series events from October 29th to December 10th. These are Thursday afternoons. I believe they're at 4 or 4:30. And we're going to do one every week. This is a new series for us. I'm really excited about it. We have on deck for that, give me one second. We're going to be talking about the World War II Museum. I'm excited to see how far they've come with the canopy and all of the renovations that they've been working on. We're also going to hear about the Odeon downtown, one of our newest and tallest multifamily projects in New Orleans. There are several events on kind of healthcare that we're going to be touching on, as well as an exciting event on the state of the restaurant industry with Nina Compton. She's the restaurateur of Compere Le Pain and Bywater American Bistro. And we recently went through a book club reading of The Color of Law, and it was really successful, and thanks to everybody who participated. And we're going to try and continue to do that. And our next book is called Evicted. And I don't know who the author is, but that should be a really exciting topic and subject to read on. And I think that's all I'm here to tee off. I'm gonna kick it off to Mike Rote with Olympic Community Development for him to talk more on the McDonogh19. And again, I'm so excited to hear how you guys are transforming this building. It's gonna be a big benefit to the Holy Cross neighborhood. So I'm excited to hear about it. Mike?
Thanks, Gene. Let me switch over to my screen. Okay. Hi, Leona.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Okay.
So what are we looking at here?
We're looking at the famous Norman Rockwell painting. And it's an image
Mhm.
of what was happening at that moment or at that time, even though they didn't do the painting for another 6 years, but it's just an image of what was going on during the desegregation time.
Right. And, a lot of people say, and if you Google this online a lot, you'll find that it's mislabeled or it's described as Ruby Bridges from November 14th, 1960. But and this is Ruby here leaving the Franz school that day with U.S. Marshals escorts. But something else was happening that day also, right?
Sure was. And this is at the McDonogh19 building in the Lower Ninth Ward on St. Claude. Same day, probably the same time. It was 3 of us at McDonogh19, myself, Leona Tate, Gail Etienne, and Tessie Prevost. And we were leaving that day with the U.S. Marshals. But it was on the same day that Ruby attended.
Right. And here's Norman Rockwell in his studio. You see some of his studies down there. And, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this partially was because I thought that was Ruby. I sort of grew up thinking that was Ruby. I grew up in a house where my mother loved Norman Rockwell paintings. And so I knew this from an early age. But this is a photograph of the model that he used. There were only 2 Black families in Stockbridge, Massachusetts at the time. But these are actually 2 different girls. They're cousins. So you can see some similarities, but they're different. And actually, Rockwell used 3 different models. And so while it is difficult to confirm that he was trying to do a composite, I would guess that I think that's what he was trying to do, because there were more than 1 girl that day that were put on the front lines of a war for equality. And I think he was inspired by all of you. So, Leona, can you talk a little bit about that day? Or actually, I'm sorry. This is what we're going to talk about, and talk about sort of this day and what led to where we are today. All of those years in between, the 60 years in between, about you and Gail and Tessie, and how you were inspired about how you were inspired by something that led to you believing that that building should be used to teach your story. However, it's not really a dream anymore.
No, it's a reality.
Right? This is from March, the week before the shutdown. And
a few days.
Yeah, a few days before the shutdown. Actually, that's right. It was the week of the shutdown. And this is you, Gail and Tessie, at the groundbreaking on the left, and on the right, we have some action photos from work in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And what is this going to be, Leona?
This is going to be the Tate, Etienne, and Prevost Interpretive Center. It's going to exhibit the desegregation of public schools. I want them to feel what we felt when we went in the building. It's also going to exhibit some other civil rights issues that happened in New Orleans. It's also going to house 25 units for seniors 55 or older, and that'll be on the 2nd and 3rd floor. We're also going to have, in the Interpretive Center, we'll be offering Undoing Racism workshops, which will be orchestrated by People's Institute of Survival and Beyond. And hopefully If it was open, it would be packed right now.
Yeah, it would be. These
would
are
be.
some images from our exhibit designers, Gallagher and Associates. These are just sort of early kind of vignettes of what we think we're looking at. So I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce somebody who has, over the last 5 years, become extremely important to me personally and professionally. It is rare that you can say that you are this close and this friendly with a civil rights icon, but that's the case. So everyone, I would like to introduce to you Miss Leona Tate, and I'll let her sort of finish her introduction.
Well, it looks like I took on a big job after I should be retiring, but that's where we are, 30 years behind time. But I'm the executive director for the Leona Tate Foundation for Change. It's a nonprofit organization that was never my intention to start, but we needed to start it to get in answers from our city officials or our school board officials, just to get something done with the building. I'm also the executive director of the Lower Ninth Ward Living Museum that houses information about the Lower Ninth Ward, beginning from the 1800s all the way back to post-Katrina. And hopefully in April, the TEP Center will be up and running, and that's TEP for short. And I'll be the executive director of that organization also. I don't know where you want me to start, Mike.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks. My name is Mike Rohde. I am with Alembic Community Development. We are a mission-driven for-profit real estate development company in New York and New Orleans. I'm in the New Orleans office with two other colleagues, Jonathan Leet, who's on this presentation also, and Sanaim Samaji. And we are a small, but we think effective little team. And we are excited to be on this project with Leona Tate Foundation for Change, Leona and her team, the People's Institute, and really everybody who's involved in this project. It's a pretty special project. I'm gonna throw to my partner John and let him introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Jonathan Light, also with Alembic, urban planner and developer by background. And as Mike said, so we do affordable and supportive housing, as well as when we do commercial projects, they're typically nonprofit facilities and or educational, and in one form or another, they're community serving. We've had a real focus on historic buildings, in particular historic schools now in New Orleans. Our business model is really predicated on our joint venture partnerships with nonprofit organizations. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about how we work and how that plays out in this project.
And we also have Chris Walker, who is the president and CEO of CDW Services. He's the general contractor on this project, and really a full-fledged partner in helping this project reach its goal. Chris, are you here?
Yes, I am here.
There you are. You want to say anything? Say a little bit about yourself and CDW?
Yeah, my name is Chris Walker. I'm the president of CDW Services, general construction firm here in the New Orleans area. We do a lot of commercial, mostly commercial construction, public and private sector. It's been a great opportunity to work with Jonathan, Mike, Alembic, and of course, Miss Leona Tate. This is a project really dear to me as an African-American contractor, being given the opportunity to work on a project of this size and this magnitude, and the opportunity gives myself and this company to grow. And I really want to thank, and I thank him every chance I get. I want to thank Mike, Leona, and Jonathan for the opportunity for us to be a part of this project.
We're happy you're on the team. It's
We're very happy.
when we have the change order meeting, we'll talk. um, all right, let's get back into this. Leona,
Mhm.
why are all these schools named McDonogh?
They were named after John McDonogh. He was one of the richest, I guess, masters in New Orleans.
Yeah, he was actually he was the richest guy in New Orleans at a time when New Orleans was the richest city in the country and quite possibly one of the richest cities in the world. So we're talking about, like, this is Jeff Bezos, right? This is Jeff Bezos of the early 1800s. And this, you would think that someone with that kind of money could find a partner, could find love. And poor John tried. He tried many times. This is one of his more famous attempts. This is Baroness Pontable, who is a very famous New Orleanian in her own right. She was probably too busy creating these. You'll know these are the buildings that line Jackson Square. And she was not interested in getting married to John McDonogh. And so this is a little bit more like the McDonogh that I imagine in my mind. He died without any heirs. He was often described as a complicated figure, but I think if you kind of understood his history, he was part of creating the manumission process in New Orleans, which is the process in which slaves can buy their freedom. But it was to a specific end. John McDonogh was not an integrationist. John McDonogh wanted his freed slaves to leave the country and had helped send many to Liberia. But upon his death, he gave his fortune to the education of poor children in New Orleans and Baltimore, black and white. And New Orleans built 40 plus schools with that money. They bought the land and paid for the building that is McDonogh-19 with John McDonough's fortune. So we want to make sure that we draw that straight line from a slave holding fortune to this building. So one other piece of history that we need to kind of cover is Homer Plessy. Homer Plessy is depicted here in this mural down very close, right off of St. Claude, only a few blocks away from McDonogh-19, along with PBS Pinchback. PBS Pinchback is on the left. If you Google Homer Plessy, you will find a bunch of photos of PBS Pinchback. And PBS Pinchback, like Homer Plessy, was a Creole New Orleans. He was 1/8 Black, and he was actually the first Black governor of Louisiana and the first Black governor in the United States. Homer Plessy, on the right-hand side, you may recognize the last name from the famous court case Plessy versus Ferguson. He was a shoemaker, and he challenged the Separate Car Act of 1890, and upon doing that was arrested and began these court cases that led to the United States Supreme Court and the famous separate but equal clause that was sort of handed down during the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which ushered in Jim Crow, continued inequality, and really a sort of an era of violence and terrorism in our country against people, against Black people. And it wasn't until 1950s when 5 court cases were brought to the Supreme Court under the name Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. So these 5 court cases were finally heard after the death of the Chief Justice, and the new Chief Justice, Earl Warren, was sworn in It took about 3 or 4 years for all of this to happen. And so in 1955, the case was finally heard and struck down Plessy, and
54.
54, and then there was a second one. So Leona, you were actually born right around that time, and then you're. I'm sorry. You told me that. And you moved to the 9th Ward in the late 50s, correct?
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that time, and especially your schools in your school experience when you moved down there?
Well, I can remember Lower 9th Ward having a lot more to do than what's going on here now. I attended kindergarten at Horton Elementary, which was 10 or 11 blocks where I used to walk to school. And at that time, there were only 2 Black schools in the entire Lower 9th Ward, and it was overcrowded. There was what they called a platoon session. You'd either go to school in the morning or you would go to school in the afternoon. I can remember being very uncomfortable. I think I cried every day because it was just so many children. It was just children all over the place. But as far as from what I can remember in the Lower 9th Ward, it was violent.
Yeah.
It was, you know.
And then then there was an advertisement, right, in the newspaper?
From what I understand, there was an application placed in the newspaper for children Black children in the Lower 9th Ward. I can remember my mother saying she paid her taxes too, so that, so she filled the application out. Like 145 applications that was submitted to the school board. Only 5 families were chosen and 4 participated. The criteria was so high, one little girl couldn't come because she didn't have a dad in the household. But they didn't choose any boys, it was all girls.
Yeah, and this is now some 6 years, 5 to 6 years after the decision, and after delay, dragging of feet at the local, state levels to thwart any sort of attempt at integration. And finally, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of this, so we urge you to research the history or come on down when we're finished and learn the history of Judge J. Skelly Wright and A.P. Turo and the efforts, just the sort of mountain climbing they did or mountain moving they did to make this happen. And so here's a little video. Let me see if I can make sure I share the, oops, what happened here? See if I can share the volume. I don't think I can. Nicole, can you share the computer volume? Let me see. Oh, here we go. Oops.
On November 14th, 1960, 3 of the girls entered McDonogh19. They encountered mobs of spitting, cursing, stone-throwing whites.
When we arrived, school was in full session. So then we started noticing that parents were taking their kids out of school.
So you're going to tell us about that day.
Well, that morning when I woke up, I had a house full of family and friends helping my mother get me prepared, but you would have thought it was a holiday because somebody had a task to do. So I remember the black car pulled up in front of the door, and the house got real quiet. So I knew I was going to a different school, and I knew something was about to happen because I can remember the silence just as it happened till today. My mom and I went to the door, and I remember her telling me, when you get in the car, you sit to the back of the seat. Do not put your face to the window. So when you see that little girl with her face to the window, that's Gail. That's not me, because I'd have caught a good one for that one. So we took the ride, which was a short ride because McDonogh19 was in the neighborhood where I lived and where all three of us lived, really. And it was a pleasure getting a ride to school, and you know, it was just something different. But when we came in from the Ritter building and when we turned on St. Claude Avenue, it was masses of people, police on horseback holding the crowd back. So being from New Orleans, the only thing I can think of was that a parade was coming. And I wanted to know why I had to go to school on Mardi Gras and everybody else got to watch the parade. My mother said, no, that's not the case. So we did enter the building. We went up the stairs. There's a staircase right on the side of this doorway here. And 18 steps. And we entered and the principal's office sat right past the foyer. And we were asked to take a seat on the bench. And we must have sat on that bench half the day before they'd even attempted to put us in class. Every last students we got in the classroom. Once we were accepted to a class, the parents were pulling their children out of school. By 3 o'clock, we were the only 3 students in the building, and that lasted for a year and a half. And
Yeah, that's a hard one. So if anybody missed that, all the white students were pulled out of the school, and Leona, Gail, and Tessie were the only students in that 40,000 square foot building for a year and a half. If you can imagine being a 6-year-old in a big empty building.
and not realizing how confined we were. We couldn't play in the yard. We couldn't eat from the cafeteria. The water fountains were turned off. The windows were papered up. We couldn't see in or out. Couldn't even go on the side of the classroom where there was a window for security reasons. But we had a very good, nurturing first grade teacher that gave us an excellent first grade education.
And then where did you go? You didn't stay there at McDonogh19, right?
No, after the Christmas holidays in second grade, 25 students joined us and only 2 were white. So McDonogh19 had become a black school. And the thing was to keep us in a white school. Transferred in third grade to TJ Sims that used to sit right on the side of the St. Claude Bridge. But this time we didn't have the police protection or the marshals. We endured a lot. We were definitely afraid to do anything there. We didn't go in the cafeteria because somebody either was gonna knock your food out your hand or they was gonna spit in it. Our little safe haven was in the yard under a tree. We endured a lot.
Yeah. So what's we're looking at the historic photo of the school building. What's been the recent fate of this building?
Well, it looks a little different now, but in 2004, it was closed because of low academics. And the principal did get in touch with 3 of us, but by the time she did, they had already made the decision to close it. Then Hurricane Katrina came in 2005, and it was damaged by the flood on the bottom floor and wind damage upstairs. I kept hearing after Katrina that only 1 school was coming back to the lower 9th ward, and there were like 5 schools before then. And everybody I talked to kept saying, well, nobody's coming back to 9th ward, so you know, they wasn't gonna do anything with, they didn't know what they wanted to do with the building, really. It was land banked. And so I kept not badgering, but trying to keep some communication with the school board that, you know, they need to open this building up. But they didn't know the history that had happened there. I had to do a presentation at one of their meetings, and they decided, well, they had put it up for sale and put it up for auction. And I did a presentation, so they decided to take it off the auction list. And that gave us time to get our act together and try to find out what we could do to buy it. And I was introduced to Olympic, and I must have gone through dozens of people before then, but that was the first person to tell me that my vision could be done. And I knew it was my time. I knew it was my time.
Then you met Grumpy Mike and John. we were I will say this, we were concerned about letting you down with such a project that needed so much to break the right way in order for it to happen. And so you probably thought we were pretty grumpy at the beginning. But now, you know, we'll lie down in the middle of St. Claude if you ask us to. Okay, so you have this vision. You want to take control of this building and you want to use it to tell your story, but the building sort of looks like this, right? Didn't look like the old photos. It had been boarded up since the storm. It had gone through the storm. And now it's like, how do we do this? Especially, you know, this is going to cost us a lot of money, right? This is going to, I'm sure John and I were throwing out these huge numbers. And and how do we do this? So now I'm going to kind of throw
it
to,
doesn't look like that anymore.
I'm going to throw to Jonathan and let him sort of pick up where that story left off.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I would say on a personal level, we've heard Leona talk so much about November 1960, and it never loses power. All right, next slide.
Sorry.
I want to talk a little bit. We're going to segue this a little bit into talking about kind of from around 2016, 2017 when we got involved forward. And something that's important to us when we work is, you know, a word that I'm going to use but then not use is equitable development. It's a buzzword that I'm sure everyone here has heard. And the way we choose to define it is not just on project outcomes, which is often how it's described, but in how we work. And so in how we work, we categorize it really three ways. The first is, and it's in how we work, is by these partners, through these partnerships. We define it three ways. First is ownership. So ownership of property is really important, state the obvious, and often it's actually not even ownership of property, but ownership of LLCs. We are a 50-50 owner with the Leona Tate Foundation for Change. Ownership of property, of course, has all kinds of racial equity concerns, and it has economics, and having a nonprofit have a property, nonprofits having a property on their balance sheet is incredibly meaningful. The second kind of pillar is economics. So not only are we sharing ownership 50-50, but we're sharing P&L, profit and loss, fees, everything 50-50. Economics means more than just cash. It means balance sheet. We would like to see a real estate industry in which the Leona Tate Foundation for Change could own this project entirely and provide everything that's needed. That doesn't exist. And so entities like ours who bring, and we are by no means a huge developer, we're a pretty modestly sized developer, but obviously we have expertise and experience and then balance sheet that we can bring to help on the financing side, to provide guarantees and other assurances to augment what LTFC, the nonprofit, is bringing. The third pillar is equally important, is decision making. We share this entirely with Leona and her team. So decision making is laid out when you have an entity. It's laid out in an operating agreement, and we all say legal documents are really important. We spend a lot of time, we spend money, negotiating these. Equally, if not far more important, though, is just the relationship and how we communicate and how we, on a day-to-day basis, make decisions. None of that is governed, in truth, by our operating agreement, right? Like Olympic is actually empowered to make non-major decisions all the time, but we don't do that. We've had weekly meetings, and Leona, how long? About 4 years? And at times we all want to cancel them. But every week we have internal project meetings, and then we separate from design construction meetings, of course, that are happening during the construction process. So I kind of can't emphasize that enough. All right, next slide. Partners. So you've heard a lot about Leona Tate and her organization, and I should say, maybe on her behalf, is that Leona, you founded in 2009?
Yes.
2009. And for the past 3 years, I believe, have been operating the Lower Ninth Ward Living Museum, which is a lot of the basis for translating and growing those operations into the TEP Center in McDonogh19 eventually. You see us. The third kind of leg of the stool that Leona mentioned earlier is the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They are a long-time New Orleans-based anti-racism organization that actually grew out of organizing public housing. And Leona and Ron Chisholm and Dr. Kimberly Richards, who are their leadership, partnered very early on to see and to show what an amazing program this could be, of having both the Interpretive Center along with active anti-racism training happening within the TEP Center. Their long-term goal is to have a communiversity, which is an actual accredited program that will be based in anti-racism and humanistic principles as an actual degree program, and that would in the future be housed as part of the TEP Center. Okay, next. Very early on, so our three organizations, LTFC, People's Institute, and Alembic, we saw real need to put together a consensus-based vision and really a mission statement for how not only the project would go, but how not only the outcomes of the project, but how we work together. So I won't read this verbatim, but you can scroll through this vision. I wanted to highlight just a couple of pieces of this. One is that this is not just early days, right, of like how we work together pre-development, who pays for what, how do we make decisions, that stuff. But this is, we as Alembic always describe this as a marriage. It's a journey of ownership and stewardship. And we use that word a lot too, stewardship. And having Leona's nonprofit be a co-owner and equal partner in the ownership is really critical to the stewardship of this from a community-based perspective. We also recognize, the second part of this, the inherent inequities in the process of development. And we stand against this tide while sustaining within that same system. I said that probably quickly, but what was important for us is to recognize that from real estate finance to real estate itself, right, owning property, these are all systems that are the kind of, unfortunately, front and center of racial inequity and racism in our country. We in no ways want to replicate that, and this project we hope will stand against that. At the same time, we recognize that we're using tax credits, we're using all kinds of money. We worked with all kinds of organizations that have all of our own histories. We're a real estate developer, so we are working within those systems, but we hope in a way that is little by little trying to change those systems. The last thing I would say is that, well, yeah, I'll keep going. Preamble. In addition to a preamble, in addition to the vision, we created this preamble, which again, hopefully people can kind of scroll through, and maybe we can distribute these slides later. Perhaps more important than the words is just the process we went through to create these. This was not a 30-minute meeting. This was multiple conversations, multiple meetings that the three organizations had, nitpicking every word, because it's important. Words really matter. And I think more recently, I'll say personally, in my growth in going through, anti-racism work and really understanding the importance of words and language. And I learned a lot going through this process. And so we really wanted to get this right. You'll see several of these are key phrases from the People's Institute, including towards the end, internalized racial oppression and gatekeeping. And so again, this idea that we understand and cannot deny that we're working within certain systems that have historically and continue to be oppressive and racially oppressive. However, we are working on this project, we hope, in a different way. Okay, I think next slide. So put this image back up of the original school. I'm going to transition a little bit from some of this maybe 30,000 foot level discussion to how we translate this into a project. And I want to be careful, speaking of language, not to describe this as kind of turning vision into reality or feasibility. And I have been long guilty of, talking about vision and feasibility on a spectrum. And I think now, see those very much as false dichotomies and things that we want to do projects that have vision and feasibility, that can actually be financed, can be operated, that don't need to sacrifice vision. And that's what we have at least attempted to do here. Several mechanics we had to figure out that we wanted to share. First was, how do we get the property? So it started with Leona. She said we would never have gotten the property if it wasn't her fighting the fight with the school board. Maybe fighting the fight's not the right necessary characterization, but educating them about what this building was, what her, Gail, and Tessie's history was with this property and the school and desegregation. And so when we stepped in 2017 or so, our job was comparatively easy. It was, let's just figure out the mechanics. The school board was bought in because of Leona, but how do we get the building from the school board to a private development between Leona and ourselves? So for those who may know a little bit about school board surplus properties, they're not permitted by state legislation to do direct sales, except with a few exceptions. And so we looked to not to reinvent the wheel. We really mimicked the mechanisms that you may know the Art Space project on Ursuline, the former Bell School, did, where they brought in the housing authority to transfer the property from the school board to Hanno, to a private entity. Hanno is not bound by many of the same mechanics that the school board is for transitioning properties. And so that was really critical to kind of figure that out and to know what our path was for acquiring the building. Second, financing. It's inescapable. It's probably the worst offender of all this stuff when it comes to racial inequity. When we first kind of walked into this, the program and the hope was to have the entire 35,000 square foot building be programmed for the Interpretive Center along with People's Institute's work. And I think what we saw soon, and what Mike started reference to in us being grumpy about, was that we didn't see a path to be able to finance that. There are not sufficient finance sources for nonprofit facilities at that scale, unless you want to charge, $30, $40 a foot in rent, which certainly is not sustainable for either nonprofit organization. So our early challenge was in figuring out, how do we program this building to accommodate appropriately the history and the future of the Interpretive Center on anti-racism space, while also having a project that we think had a good shot at being financed. And so that's where affordable housing came in. So as Leona referenced earlier, the second and third floors now are going to be 25 units of affordable senior housing for seniors 55 and older. And that really, the senior focus came from Leona, but you were the one who said, it's seniors who are struggling most to get back to our community, to get back to Lower Ninth Ward. And so we really focused in on senior housing. Two more things that we need to figure out was, beyond just that program, was obviously an operational budget. It's tough when you have affordable housing and then affordable rents for two nonprofit tenants. There doesn't leave much cash left over to support conventional financing. So we knew right from the beginning that this was going to be a project up front on the development financing that was going to take a lot of sources. And it's going to take a lot of people bought in to buy in. And that was going to be a mountain to climb, but we really believe strongly in the power of the project, of Leona, her organization, and People's Institute, and kind of bet on ourselves too, that we could pull that together. One of those pieces, and this will transition back to Mike, clearly was historic tax credits. And with historic tax credits come all kinds of nice incentives, and comes with all kinds of nice challenges. So with that, Mike, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks. So this is a real dumb, quick diagram of the residential is the lighter color above, and the interpretive center is this, I'm colorblind, so I don't really know what color it is. maybe it's a red color below. And, you know, I think that this is an opportunity for me to get on a soapbox, which I often take, even if they're not opportunities. I sort of find ways to make them my soapbox opportunities, and talk a little bit about what the historic tax credit means in my mind and what it means in this project, because I think this project defines the future of the historic tax credit, or it should. And anyone who's been involved with the historic tax credit on a school building will know that there's this term called the character defining space. And the character defining space is sort of the most important sort of space in the building. And to those of you who aren't familiar, it may be surprising to hear that the hallway, the main hallway, is the character defining space. So in most of our buildings in New Orleans, that main hallway is actually the second floor hallway, because the ground floors were often walkout basements or whatnot. But you can, you know, if you're familiar with any of the schools, you see these nice staircases that lead up to the second floor. But the standard of that was that the reason why was that because students, all of the students in the school use the hallway, right? Well, this is not that type of school. If you remember Leona's story from earlier, there were only three students in this building for a year and a half. And that is the reason why this building is on the National Register, not for its architecture. Sorry, AEA Christie. It is because of the desegregation of the school. And so we have to start to begin to think about how we challenge the standards of historic preservation of the building, and the reason why we're preserving the buildings, because we're really preserving stories, not buildings. And so this conversation went to the State Historic Preservation Office, and it went to the National Park Service, who do the managing of these programs, both the state and federal program. And I have to say that we are spoiled because we live in a state that is progressive in its historic preservation, is thoughtful. They are undoubtedly the hardest working preservation office in the country by the numbers. And they listened, and they were really supportive in us figuring out how to put in a bunch of apartments in this hallway, put in exhibit space in this hallway, and you're looking at the second floor plan, and do all of this and still satisfy the historic tax credit sort of guidelines that we can't change, you know, overnight. And so this is the exit. I mean, the entry stairs on St. Claude. There's a lobby here that Leona spoke about. And this door here was the principal's office door. And so we are actually sort of creating a bit of a fishbowl with storefront glass and creating exhibition space in here, because we felt like that story of that first day where those three little girls had to sit on a bench, and they didn't sit on the bench the whole time. From my understand, they either found some chalk or they created a hopscotch board on the ground and played hopscotch while the school was emptying out of white students. And so we felt like that story could not be lost to the necessity of the corridor for the units. And so we figured out a way, walked through with the folks from the SHPO office. And I think this is going to be a really exciting piece to this building. And I think it's also going to be a poignant sort of marker for the future of historic preservation. For us to question, what are we preserving and why are we preserving them? This is a little bit of a sketch from Gallagher and Associates about what might the exhibition space might look like. There's a little bit of new development with this. We actually found some staircases that jog Leona's memory, and we're now working on trying to get those put back in, some interior staircases. You can see, here's a photograph of those those openings, and this is the St. Claude entry, and this is kind of where the exhibit will be. And so I just want everybody to kind of think about that as we kind of work on other historic buildings in our city, and understand that there's architecture that should be preserved for its architecture, importance, but there's far more stories, there's far more events that happened in buildings that are everyday, that are dare I say mundane in their design, but their stories are the stories that we have to preserve and champion. And I believe that the credit is an important tool in making sure that we can do that. So here's a couple other shots of that entryway. So now I want to get Chris Walker on mute and talk about, as I kind of flip through some of these photos, and I'm going to ask Chris a couple questions. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about the CDW experience on this project so far? I know we're only halfway through, so.
It's been a great experience. Anytime you have a great owner and a great architect, you always have a great experience. One of those don't fall in place, then the experience kind of gets a little wacky. But it's been a great experience. Every project, and one thing about construction, you can never know too much. Every project is a particular learning experience. Especially with us dealing with COVID, in the middle of COVID, with getting demo permits and waiting on building permits, and then COVID hits and there's nobody in the permit office. How do we keep the projects accelerating as much as we can and try to keep a schedule? So it's been exciting. We've been dealing with different intricacies of an old building. Once you got an old building, then you get to see the old bones and what you got to do to put it back together.
Yeah, this has been, there hasn't been a boring day yet on this project. However, I say that it's been a real pleasure working with everybody on this project. Also, it's extra special when you're working on such an important project, and everybody that's working on it sort of feels the same way. So I know that we've talked a little bit about this being one of your bigger projects, and kind of want you to talk a little bit about what an opportunity like this means.
Yeah, I go speak to a lot of colleges and high schools and elementary schools and talk about business and growth. And, one of the things I tell everybody was my senior year in college, I decided to take night school and try to get into the workforce. And I was making roughly $50,000 a year, working for my dad's construction firm at the time. Yeah, they can come over here a second. And I went to go buy my first car, right? It was an Avalanche truck. It was about $35,000. And when I went to go buy the car, they said, well, you don't have bad credit, but you don't have enough credit. And I always say, well, if you don't give me credit, I'll never have credit. And I think the same applies with construction. You hear a lot of things, well, what's your expertise? Have you done a project this size? Well, if you don't ever give me a project this size, I'll never have this project this size. So someone has to take the risk. And I think Mike and Ms. Leona and Jonathan took the risk with me. And it's been a great opportunity for growth, for bonding, and, growing as far and hiring new employees and learning new things, aspects of work, because every project is different. No matter how much I can do 10 of these schools, there's going to be something different in 10 of these schools. And the most knowledge you can get from these different projects, it helps.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that we discussed how we build this team on this project for 4 years at minimum, right? We, in those weekly meetings, it was often a real challenging topic of this, discussion, given the state of the construction industry, the way that it works, and like Chris said, if you don't sort of take that risk, how is that company going to be able to kind of move up? And we're now in this country coming to terms with the entire sort of systems of our country sort of being exposed as unequal and racist. And it would be impossible for us to have done this project any other way. And so I want to say that this has been a fantastic experience so far, and I am confident that we're going to finish up, and we're going to have we're going to have something to be really proud of, and that those little boys there behind you will one day go there and say, "My dad built this,"
Right. That's right.
So we're sort of flipping through some photographs. You can see this thing is starting to kind of come together, starting to look like its old self. Leona and I, and Leona, I should say, my wife is on this, and she'll get me if I say this. Leona picked the paint colors. I'm colorblind, and my wife said, "Do not let Mike pick paint colors." And you can see that this thing is really starting to come back together in a really great way. Jonathan?
Yeah, Mike, real quick, can you go back just to show the cafeteria? I think.
Oh, yeah.
School, and just say a minute about that.
Yeah, so this building here is the cafeteria, and it was built a few years after the original building was built. And in some of our initial conversations, we sort of thought like, oh, this probably should go away because we need the land. We need to, we need space outside for parking and other things, and maybe a bigger building, a new addition or something like that. But then, we heard the story of how Leona, Gale, and Tessie were not allowed into this building. They were not allowed into the cafeteria. And the cafeteria was sort of connected by a little sort of hallway that they built, connecting the two buildings. But Leona, if you want to unmute for a second, I believe that you were told that this was for your own good.
Yeah, for safety reasons. I'm thinking for safety reasons, because either they didn't want to cook for us, or they just had to be careful of who we ate from. We had to bring our food and beverages to school with us every day.
Yeah.
And even drink water, the water fountain was off.
Right. So we all felt as a team like that was an important piece of this story. This idea that even in the attempt to integrate, it was done in a way that wasn't fully equal. So we saved the building, and we're going to restore it and use it for kind of multi-purpose space. And when everybody on this Zoom opens up their wallets and makes donations to the Yelena Tate Foundation, they can also maybe get a commercial kitchen one day. John?
So first of all, apologies that we are, and Nicole, I'm sorry, I said we would keep this to 45 minutes. We're after 5. It seems like everyone's sticking with us. So I will wrap this up very quickly because we did want to have some time for Q&A. So thank you for indulging this longer presentation than we had planned. Wanted to show the sources and uses, starting with the uses. I would just highlight here that the construction is about 60% of total budget. Acquisition, you know, is it was higher than we wanted, but it was about 5%. So there's 35% of other stuff here, and that's pretty typical, entirely typical for tax credit projects. And it's something that it can be difficult for people to get their head around about how much other things cost. And when they think about projects, they think about hard costs. And yeah, that's maybe the biggest single line item. It's made up of multiple line items, but there's so much more that goes into this that that has to be dealt with. All right, next. Next slide is shows all our sources. So we referenced earlier about how many, sometimes depending on how you separate them all, I usually count 12. Some of these are line items on this slide or grouping. New market tax credits, federal and state historic tax credits. We had loans from the city of New Orleans, from the state of Louisiana, Louisiana Housing Corporation. I should highlight that we received $2 million in housing trust fund money. And as far as I know, it's the first time, maybe the only time, that housing trust fund money has been leveraged through a new markets deal. Typically, they're used in LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, I'm sorry. And we had a real decision to make from a financing perspective whether this could have been a low-income housing tax credit project. We decided to go with the new markets because of a bunch of different reasons, including the ground floor being this community facility. But also because we had this opportunity to apply for up to $2 million from the state for this housing trust fund loan that could not be used with low-income credits, but it could be used with new markets, which it could, by its silence on new markets, it could be used with new markets. So all these kind of little opportunities and things broke well for us. We can't highlight enough how important the National Park Service has been in this project. We've received 3 different grants from them, 2 under its African American Civil Rights Program, $500,000 each, and then a third from its Save America's Treasures Program, another $500,000. So $1.5 million total, which they have told us is, I think, far and away the most they've ever allocated to a given project. One of those grants is going specifically for the cafeteria that Mike showed. But again, it's kind of like above and beyond what we could have imagined from the Park Service. And it, you know, speaks so much to how they were partners not only on the issues Mike described with the central hallway, but then also on the financing side. And you see some other grants. I know actually we have a representative from the Brownfields program, so I want to highlight this. Louisiana has a wonderful Department of Environmental Quality EPA program that can give significant grants for our remediation. So we had lead-based paint, asbestos, that was entirely covered by, as you see, this $150,000, a grant that was awarded. So incredibly thankful for that. You notice obviously there's owner equity in here and some other grant sources, but yeah, 15.7 million total. Well, I do want to say one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. Racial equity, people talk about racial equity in underwriting, or at least folks in the capital provider side have been talking about this in the past several years about how to incorporate that. And we really selected our lenders, our taxpayer investors, and others specifically because of the work that they were doing internally as capital providers around racial equity, and how to think about that, and how to think about underwriting, which is inherently, you know, it's one of the prime suspects within structural racism. And they had done a lot of work internally around that, and it really helped get across the finish line. If we had gone to a kind of a typical lender, we ended up getting a $2 million loan, hard loan from the Reinvestment Fund, which is a great community development financial institution based in Philadelphia that has invested in several projects in New Orleans. If instead had been a regular bank, you know, we would never have gotten through underwriting. Having 2 amazing nonprofits as your anchor tenants, who, more than importantly being nonprofit, just for a variety of just our non-credit tenants, that can be tough for some lenders to get through. And so you really have to choose those funders carefully. Okay.
John, I'd also add that most of those lenders and CDEs and people involved on the sources side on this list here, many of them attended a one-day People's Institute Undoing Racism workshop with us the day after the groundbreaking, and we think that's a real sign that they are bought in to the work of this building will do.
Yeah, thank you for reminding us that. Yes, and so we as a team have done several workshops, but having all these folks participate and hopefully as part of a broader process is really meaningful. All right, lastly, I think I'll skip over this next slide, but there's a lot happening. Legal structuring. I think we have one of our attorneys, Jeff Good, on the line. But what's maybe most important here is that nonprofits can use tax credits. It's still amazing to us that we hear all the time that nonprofits can't use historics or can't use new markets, and that's just not true. Right? You need good tax counsel and good CPAs and other things, but they absolutely can. This is just a list of our partners, and I would say there are folks who are local, who are national. One of our new markets allocatees is from Rock Island, Illinois, and it happened that their CEO is from Baton Rouge and had volunteered after Katrina in the Lower Ninth Ward, and that is the reason that they invested $5 million of new market tax credits in our project. So you just kind of never know how things are going to go. Okay, and with that, we'll conclude. One maybe last thing to say is that I borrow this from Mike, who has concluded his presentation with a thank you to Leona, Gail and Tessie, and Ruby as well. And I want to echo that. I also want to highlight, Mike, on the last slide is their website, thetepcenter.org. And there's a campaign that they're doing called Because of You, I Am. And it's to record video messages of yourself speaking to Leona, Gail, Tessie, Ruby, and talking about how you are because of them. And white, black, we all owe them our gratitude and our appreciation and admiration. So anyway, thank you, Leona. And I encourage everyone to go visit their website and take a look at that.
You're welcome. And I just want to say we'll be celebrating 60 years.
Leona's breaking up a little bit, so I'll fill in for the 60th anniversary of desegregation is next month. And if you go to TEP Center, there will be a range of information on the commemoration for the anniversary. And with apologies for going way over, we are happy to take questions if anyone would like to ask.
This is Melissa. I have some connectivity issues, so my camera's going to stay off, but Melissa Lee with Concordia. First and foremost, Mike and Jonathan, you can to make me proud to call you friends and collaborators. And certainly, Mrs. Tate, we stand on your shoulders. We thank you for your service and thank you for your brilliance.
Thank
I
you,
want to pick up on a statement I believe Mike made about the continual thread, the continuum of the thread. So, you talked about this country being built on the economy of enslaving Africans. McDonogh19 was funded by a enslaver, right? There's a thread through to the 1960s civil rights movement. How do you see the continuum of that thread now that we're in the 2020 civil rights movement? How does the building itself, how does the space for reflection, how is that thread being shaped? What is the thread? How will that thread guide us as we move forward?
Well, I should say, and I was hoping to just let it be implied, but Leona Tate Foundation for Change owns the building, right? And so now, even though we had to pay for it and got a surprise the day before the closing on the appraisal, it's now owned by someone who was not allowed in the building 60 years ago. And so I think there's no better symbolism than sort of the actual, right? And so I think that the thread is now a different color and is now working in a different way. And I think that that for many folks, the idea that this year is anything different should not come as a shock to some of our audience here, because there are people on this call, Leona in particular, who have been dealing with this for their entire lives. And so I think that thread is one, it's a different color, and two, it's working in the opposite direction. And I actually think, Leona, you probably may want to take this. I shouldn't do all the talking.
I just think that once, we're in use of the building, it's just some dialogue. We need dialogue. And I think that'll change the thread through the building. Once they come in and experience what they experience and then talk about it, it should be done. It should be all over.
Thanks, Melissa. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
Thanks to everyone and Ms. Tate in particular. You guys may have said this, but when do you anticipate the building opening up? And when the building is the construction is complete, will the sort of programming from Ms. Tate's foundation and from the People's Institute, is that expected to start sort of as soon as the building is open up, or is that timeline still to be determined?
We should be ready to start the day. We hope to have our residents in there also. Mike, you give the date when we'd be ready.
Yeah, so we're slated to kind of finish the substantial completion sometime in the spring of next year, and then we'll start the kind of residential move-in and operations there. Downstairs, we will, I believe, right now, I think we'll have a few of the exhibit spaces kind of ready, but I think that's probably going to be sort of a soft sort of start. The People's Institute will likely move in pretty quickly after, when they're ready when we're ready for them to move in and start their training. And as we work with Leona Tate Foundation and the TEP Center to continue to kind of raise the money needed to build out the exhibits and everything, that will sort of start to kind of build out over 2021. Another question?
Hi. Courtney and Ashley with Bart's office. First of all, I want to thank all of you for this just amazing story. Ashley said she couldn't speak because she would be in tears if she said anything. So, and I honestly, now that I'm talking, I kind of feel the same. But I guess kind of our question is once the building is complete and the exhibition center is open, Ms. Tate, are you going to be having any kind of public speaking forums where you would be there to kind of tell your story? It's astonishing and admirable. I can't even imagine what you went through, but just the opportunity to really have conversation with someone that has done such amazing things. Is that kind of in the cards for once the space is set?
Oh, definitely. They won't let me get away with that one.
Leona has a corner office.
Good.
So she will be there.
In the back. But
I
I'll
was
be there.
visit.
You can always, in the meantime, you can always visit the Living Museum. I think by appointment still, or you have hours now, Leona?
Yeah, we're still by appointment.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic museum. in the lower ninth ward in a double. It's really amazing. I've got a question from the chat from one Dejan Jordan. It says, thank you for shedding a light on this process. And Ms. Tate, I'm wondering what your hope is for the youth of New Orleans who visit your space, given your experience with this building first as a young person.
I find that the schools just are not teaching what all they need to know about the civil rights here in New Orleans. And it's an insult when you go to a school here and the kids don't know you, but if you go out of state, they know all about you. So hopefully in this space will be as much research as that we're doing. I hope it'll all be in this space, and they can come and learn, you know, what they don't know about their own city. And you know, I just think they'll appreciate it a little bit better if they know what really happened here. And not just with the school desegregation, it was a lot of history here in New Orleans. It's a lot.
Any other questions? Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for coming and going over time with us. Courtney, I also, when I tell a lot of this story, I get pretty verklempt and choked up. So you're not alone. Leona, would you like to sort of have the last?
Sure. I want to say thank everyone for listening to this story. I mean, it's I get full every time I talk about it, but it's like I see people are tired of hearing the same old story, you know. But I know it's needed, and I do my best to tell it the best way I can, without getting full. But I just thank everybody for just appreciating what we're doing, and just follow the website, and you can keep up with us. And I don't think Chris will mind if you go take a peep right now.
Just make sure you check in with the head superintendent first.
I'm the only one that don't have to wear the helmet. Okay, all right. But it's been a pleasure. Thank y'all so much. It really has been.
Thank you all. Nicole, is there anything else in closing?
I just want to, on behalf of ULI Louisiana, thank everybody for attending. Leona, thank you so much for sharing your story. It gave me goosebumps to hear it. And once it's open and life goes back to normal, I hope we can do an in-person tour of the space and hear it from you in person. So I just want to thank everybody for attending, and hope to see the space soon.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great one.
You too.